Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I used to write blog posts about protein-packed meal plans and 10-minute bodyweight workouts. Simple stuff that made people feel like they were making progress. That was my public face. My name, a clean font, a short list of exercises next to a filtered photo of grilled chicken and lentils. What I didn't write was that before all that, I was the skinny kid who ate lunch in the janitor's stairwell to avoid getting shoved into lockers. I was the one who carried a weathered survival manual in my backpack and practiced how to slip a pack over a fence without making the chain link rattle. I didn't lift weights to impress anyone. I did it to make sure no one could hold me down again. I'm 37 now, 5'10" if I stand right. I've built a life that doesn't look much like the one I came from. Certified fitness trainer, clean kitchen, shelves of mason jars and kettlebells. My wife, Lena, is a chemist, organized, precise, the kind of person who can turn a cluttered box of unlabeled bottles into a working lab. My son, Mark, is 15. He speaks machine better than most people speak English. He once built a working sensor array from a dead Roomba and 2 busted drones. We lived in Erie, Pennsylvania, in a modest 2-bedroom brick house not far from Presque Isle Bay. A maple tree stood in the yard, and the porch chairs had permanent rust marks from never being moved. When the local station started running banners across the bottom of the screen, localized outbreaks, precautionary checkpoints, short-term quarantine zones, I muted the volume and just sat there for a moment. Then I stood up and told Lena it was time to pack. Not to panic, not to board up windows or call neighbors. Just leave, get ahead of whatever this was. We'd spent enough time off-grid over the years to know what it felt like when society shifted. You could sense when a place stopped being stable. The city wasn't going to fall apart all at once, but it was going to start leaking. Shortages, confusion, rumors. Then the wrong people showing up with the wrong assumptions. We'd always said that if anything ever tipped too far, we'd go back into the woods. Now it was tipping. I texted my parents in Bulgaria. My mom replied with a red heart. My dad sent only one sentence. Don't worry about us. Take care of your family. Lena messaged hers in Oregon. 3 hours passed. The answer was a grainy photo of empty shelves with short caption, "We'll try again later." And message, "If things go badly, come to us." Lena wrote that we'll see how it goes. Out in the high ridges near Tiona, I kept a cabin. Not a rental, not a vacation spot. Mine. I built it with my own hands before I had a following, or clients, or even steady work. It's the kind of place no one stumbles across by accident. Old logging roads curve out that way, roads so forgotten they don't show up on gas station maps. No cell signal, no street lights, just the trees, the dark, and whatever you brought with you. I go there every fall to restock. Salt, rice, fuel tablets, candles, extra batteries, canning lids, and a few things I won't write down. Not because I expect the world to end, but because I've never forgotten how fast it can try. Habits like that don't just fade, they burrow in. We agreed to leave at first light. That night, I moved through the house quietly, checking gear so I wouldn't disturb the fragile quiet that still existed between us and the panic starting to bloom beyond our street. I sharpened broadheads for the crossbow, laid out the savage bolt action with 3 clean magazines, confirmed the 0 on the scope. I wrote our supply list in block letters like it was an old ritual. Water, fuel, cloth, salt, oats, oil, bleach, wire, fuses, tarps. I charged the radios. I checked the headlamps and the propane. I did not sleep. I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling fan while my mind walked every shelf in that cabin, counting jars, checking lids, opening and closing the bolt on the rifle in my imagination. That's how it began for us. Not with screaming, not with sirens, not with blood. Just a sentence spoken softly over a beaker. A good plan waking up. And the past, our real past, quietly standing up and walking back into the room. At sunrise, the neighborhood looked like a Sunday morning after a storm. Quiet streets, a few people dragging bins. A police cruiser rolled past with the windows up, and the officer's jaw set like he had decided to save his words for someone he knew. I loaded the SUV with camp bins and a pair of 5-gallon fuel cans. Mark secured his Pelican case of parts with ratchet straps and showed me the compact power board he had built from scavenged laptop cells. Lena packed the lab kit she keeps for tutoring, a pH meter, reagents for water tests, and a roll of lab-grade tubing. She also slid the family photos into a single envelope and said she did not want to leave them to the damp. We left a note for our elderly neighbor, Mr. Doyle, with our names and a radio frequency from an old ham guide. I knew it was hopeful, but I wrote it anyway. I put the crossbow behind the driver's seat, the rifle in a soft case under the floor, and we pulled into traffic. West 8th Street was busier than a normal Monday morning. A pickup was parked across 2 lanes by the pharmacy with both doors open. A woman in blue scrubs stood outside talking to a state trooper whose eyes had the distant focus of a person giving themselves orders. At the grocery store lot, carts drifted like boats that slipped a knot. I told Lena and Mark we would do one fast sweep. No hero moves, I said. Think shelf-stable and things that burn. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed like a tired insect. The shelf with pasta was mostly empty, but the baking aisle still had flour. A young man in a varsity jacket counted canned tomatoes like he was building a shrine. I took 2 sacks of flour, oil, salt, and a box of oatmeal. Mark found a crate of long-life milk cartons and 2 spools of heavy twine. Lena picked up bleach, peroxide, a packet of yeast, a bag of iodized salt, and a stack of coffee filters. When a shout went up near the pharmacy counter, we stepped into the beverage aisle and waited. A metal rack toppled somewhere beyond the paper goods. No one ran toward the noise. People moved around it like they were driving in snow. We paid cash to a clerk who did not look up from the register display, then rolled the cart out and loaded fast. Before leaving Erie, I took one last loop past downtown to understand the edges of what was happening. We parked by an empty law office near State Street and watched the square from a block away. A line had formed outside a bank with the lights off. 2 municipal workers in reflective vests stood by a barricade with a roll of caution tape, taking turns looking at their phones. At Perry Square, a strange scene unfolded around the fountain. A man in a suit jacket stood on the lip, shoes soaked, gently turning his head like he was reading the air. A woman tried to talk to him, and he reached out, not fast, just steady, and stepped down into water he did not register. The woman backed away, hands raised in a plea. 2 officers approached with measured steps, speaking in low tones like they were coaxing a dog off a porch. The suited man bumped the fountain edge and kept walking until he touched the officer's chest, then kept pressing like he was trying a locked door. A 3rd person, hair matted and clothes stiff with old stains, moved across the lawn as if drawn by a magnet no one else felt. No shouting, no sprint, just steady, wrong patience. We watched from the car with the windows up and the engine idling. Across the square, a bus stopped at an angle. The driver set the parking brake and stared straight ahead. Nobody got on. A kid in a hoodie filmed from behind a tree. The officers did not raise their voices. One reached for zip ties. The suited man leaned until both men had to brace. A 4th figure appeared from the far side of the square and walked into a bicycle rack, paused, then turned and sought the nearest moving person like water follows slope. I put the SUV in gear. "We've seen enough," I said. Lena nodded, jaw tight. Mark kept his eyes on the sidewalks as if memorizing faces would make the world more predictable. We took a back route, passing a small storefront church with a signboard that read, "Services online until further notice." It felt like a joke told to no one. We swung by a hardware store and picked up a roll of roofing tar, 2 packs of screws, and a coil of wire. The clerk had a baseball game playing on an old radio that kept repeating the same ad. He didn't ask for IDs. He didn't ask anything. He counted change twice and stared at his hands each time. On Interstate 79, the overhead sign near McKean flashed, "Checkpoint ahead," and "Expect delays." I took the exit for Route 19 and cut west, then south on back roads until trees got taller than houses. In Edinburgh, a sheriff's SUV had its light bar on, but no one sat inside. Lena said we should stop for a proper first aid restock, and I said we would do better to keep moving. That was our first argument of the month. We pulled over beside the community park and talked in low voices while Mark pretended to scroll his phone. I can make antiseptics, Lena said. I can make basic disinfectants, but I cannot make sterile gauze out of air. Understood, I said. But the last thing we want is to get boxed into a roadblock. We have enough to treat small cuts and a fever. We go now. And once we're set up, we plan a surgical run to a place that is not already being stripped. She looked at the quiet main street. The hardware store's door was propped with a paint can. Surgical run, she said. Then let it go for now. We pulled back out and drove south past Union City, then east, bending toward Tidiuta. We saw the first one at a county line sign. A man with a torn jacket walked into the lane, steady, head slightly tilted as if listening for a bus that would never come. No foam, no sprint, none of the movie scenes people argued about online. He did not react to the horn. He did not react to our voices. He put a palm on the passenger door while we were still rolling. I swerved, and he went down, then got back up in the mirror, patient and wrong, as if pulled upright by strings. We reached the cabin in late afternoon. The logging road in was rough, just ruts under leaves, and the SUV scraped twice. The place is a 16 by 20 footprint with a steep roof and a porch built from reclaimed barn beams. I built it with my hands before I ever took a training client. The door still sticks when humidity rises. The lantern hooks still hang where I put them the year Mark learned to ride a bike on the abandoned airstrip near Corrie. I walked the perimeter while Lena and Mark unloaded. The lock on the tool shed was untouched. The rain barrels were half full and clear on top. A mouse had found the pantry and gnawed a paper sack of rice, but the rest survived. We did the first hour on tasks without speaking much. Mark ran the extension cable from the solar suitcase to the small charge controller I keep under the bed and checked voltages like he was taking a test he enjoyed. I checked the chimney flue and the roof flashing, then split a half rack of kindling. Lena tested the well with her kit and marked a chalk X on the stone where she liked the numbers. I unrolled the map of the Allegheny National Forest and circled the river bends where I had pulled smallmouth bass in better years. When we finally sat at the table, Mark asked if this was a vacation and cracked a smile that didn't fit his eyes. It's a training block, I said. Short term at first, 30 days. We measure food in weeks and fuel in hours. This is a tactical pause, not a bunker. We think and move. He nodded. Lena wrote day 1 on a small spiral notebook. She prints in neat block letters when she's serious. She wrote down the date, water test numbers, and an inventory of the first aid kit with the gaps underlined. Then she made a short list titled, "Ask Me Again," and I knew I would see clinic on it 3 times. That night the dark had weight. Distant, a single shot rolled through the trees like someone dropped a board onto a concrete floor. We kept the lantern low and went through rules. The crossbow is for near work. The rifle is for nuisances you cannot talk out of their plan. Waste nothing. Doors stay locked. No lights facing windows after dusk. We wrote down the sound traps we would set in the morning. Fishing line across the north trail to a chain of cans. A pair of pie plates wired to a nail to clatter if brushed. Glass bottles with pebbles hung at knee height. We set a watch chart for the first week and pretended we would stick to it like a coach's schedule. I lay quiet and listened. The wind shifted and brought the smell of damp leaves and cold soil. Somewhere an owl worked its territory with the patience of a metronome. A car engine coughed on the road a mile away, then died. Mark turned in his sleep and mumbled something about a loose connector. Lena didn't move for a long time, then reached over and squeezed my hand once, like a check mark. Day 2 started before sunrise. I left the rifle in the rack and took the crossbow, a small hatchet, and my old compass. The forest at dawn is a study in layers. Fog in the low runs. Birds checking their boundaries with the same 3 notes as yesterday. I found a small fall of branches near the east trail where something had dragged by. I followed for 20 yards and found a shoe. Not new, not ruined, with no foot in it. The laces were neatly tied. I returned and said nothing because Lena was boiling water for oats and the day did not need that detail yet. We rationed to 1 hot meal a day and a cold meal at dusk. I started a ledger for calories and another for tasks. Mark built a hand-crank light out of an old drill and a diode bank so we could save battery for other jobs. Lena organized the shelf by use cases and expiration estimates. At mid-morning, a rustle in the trees turned into two people walking the logging road, a woman and a boy, slow, the boy's shirt and face marked by dark streaks. I set the crossbow on the porch rail and held up my free hand. "Hello," I said. "We have a sick person here and can't risk contact. Please keep moving." The woman looked, then did not look. She adjusted the boy's shoulder, and the two of them moved on like the road was a treadmill. When they were gone, Lena stared at the place where they had stood. "If that was my parents," she said, "and someone told me to keep moving, I would remember their voice for a long time." I nodded, and didn't pretend to have a clean fix for a dirty world. We disinfected the path with a splash of diluted bleach where their shoes had dragged. Mark wrote bleach perimeter on the rules list like a student copying a formula he finally believed. Day 3, a radio voice made it through the static. A station in Warren County repeated a loop about quarantine zones forming near larger towns and to shelter in place. It used the phrase, "walking infected," which I did not need after Perry Square. We spent the day hardening the door with scrap plate and installing a second hasp. Mark wired a motion switch to a string of lights on the porch so anything taller than a raccoon would light itself before touching the steps. He was proud. I told him to add a mechanical backup because power is a fair weather friend. In the afternoon, on the far side of the clearing, we saw another figure move where no one should be. This one was small, a man a head shorter than me, clothes dark with old stains, shoes mismatched. He walked along the brush line in a steady arc and paused at each trunk as if checking a fence no one else could see. I raised the crossbow, then lowered it. He was outside the wire and moving away. He would find something in the woods and press on it until it broke or pressed back. We kept our work quiet and watched until he was gone. Day 4, we hunted. I took the crossbow to the creek, while Lena and Mark cleaned tools and set jars to soak. A 7-point buck came through at a cautious angle, sniffing the air. I did not take that shot. Instead, I waited for a smaller doe and put a broadhead through both lungs. I field dressed by the creek on a tarp and hauled the meat on a game sled to keep blood out of the ruts. Lena met me with buckets and we did the butchering behind the shed with an old rhythm. We salted a portion, hung strips to smoke, and packed the rest in the coldest corner of the root cellar, where air moves like a slow tide. Mark stood watch with the rifle on a bipod, and flinched once when a blue jay scolded the world like a traffic cop. On the path back from the creek, we found prints that were not ours, shallow and uneven, like someone who didn't fully commit to each step. The stride length was wrong for a healthy adult. We followed them to the edge of the clearing, then lost them where pine needles gathered. I marked 3 spots for deadfall traps and made a note to dig a perimeter pit on the downhill side, where leaves conceal soft ground. Not to catch animals, to slow what doesn't read signs. The days found shape. We split wood in the morning, fixed, cleaned, then trained. I ran drills with Mark on how to step through a doorway with the crossbow so he wouldn't flag family. Lena made a set of salves from pine and willow bark, not because miracle cures fix the world, but because pain makes people clumsy, and clumsy gets you hurt. At night we listened. Sometimes it was just wind combing the ridge, sometimes a far voice calling a name that didn't answer. I taught Mark how to read noise like a map. What belongs, what doesn't, what can be ignored, what requires you to set the mug down quietly and pick up a tool. On day 6, we had our second human contact. A man in his 50s, thin, held together by a jacket 2 sizes too big, drifted toward the shed. He had a small revolver tucked into his waistband with no holster. I stepped out and said hello, and he asked for a drink. I gave him water at a distance and an energy bar. When he turned, I saw the back of his neck was bruised like he had slept against a doorknob. His hands shook, but his eyes were clear. He said his name was Jer. He said the gas station in Tiona had a fight in the morning, and the state police taped the door and drove off. He asked if I had seen a red Honda with a cracked taillight. I said no. He put the energy bar in his pocket like it was a photograph he wanted to save, and walked away with his shoulders set in a line that did not promise a destination. After he left, Lena said, We are going to have to decide how we treat people like him. We treat them like a risk, I said. We treat them with respect from a distance. If he comes back and we are not ready, that is on us. Mark asked what would happen if Jer came back with friends. I pointed to the tripwire and the can line and the wedge that locks the back door from the inside. Then we let the work we did do the first talking, I said. Day 7 brought rain. The road turned to soup and the trees shed leaves like a bad habit. In the afternoon, a figure stepped out of the fog at the top of the drive. The slow gait and the way the head drifted told me before the clothes did. I put a bolt through the left eye socket at 10 yards, and the body folded like a tent being taken down without discussion. We burned the head and buried the rest far from the well. While we worked, we spoke the rules out loud like pledges. No bare hands, no touching your face. Tools soaked and set aside. Boots scrubbed before the threshold. No shortcuts. By sunset, I had the first perimeter pit started on the downhill side of the clearing, where the leaf litter lies thickest. It was a rectangle wide enough to take a body and deep enough to make climbing out a struggle. I drove sharpened stakes into the base at an angle, not to pierce armor like in a movie, just to make getting back up slow and loud. I laid a lattice of thin branches over the top and dusted it with leaves, then set a discreet marker rock so we would not forget our own trap. We argued again that night, this time quieter. Lena wanted to try the clinic in Marionville for gauze and antibiotics. I said we needed a week more of quiet to learn the neighborhood. Every day we wait, the shelves get lighter, she said. And every day we rush, we roll dice with our names on them, I said. Mark listened and pretended he did not. We split the difference. Day 10 we would go, not by the main road, but by the old ATV path that crosses behind the ridge and comes out near the ranger station. Days 8 and 9 we prepared. Mark built a tiny alarm in an Altoids tin that would ping if a loop of wire was broken. He mounted it at shin height across the porch steps. I camouflaged the SUV with a tarp and leaf litter, and we walked the first mile of the ATV path to memorize landmarks. Old split stump that looks like horns, boulder with a flat face like a mile marker, blowdown that forces a detour. On the second day, we found dark smears on a sapling and a pair of sunglasses on the ground. Stepped on, one lens cracked. We backed out and returned to the cabin, changed the watch to 2-hour blocks, and ate early so we could catch sleep before the morning move. Day 10. We stepped out before dawn. I carried the rifle and 3 loaded magazines. Lena took the small pack with the med kit and a pry bar. Mark carried a short axe and his multi-tool roll, and he wore the headset from his wiring jobs like it could tune the woods. We moved slow and talked little. On the ridge we saw smoke in 2 columns. One from the direction of town, thin and steady, one from the far valley, thicker, dirty, a structure fire by the look of it. We reached the edge of Marionville around 9 and stayed in the tree line, watching the sidewalks. The clinic had a generator humming and a handwritten sign on the door that said, "Staffed, knock and wait." A minivan sat angled in the lot with the rear window broken and a child's seat still buckled. Across the street, the diner had chairs on tables and a yellow notice about closure for disinfection. We announced ourselves, and a nurse in a mask opened the door 6 inches and asked for our names and symptoms. Lena did the talking. She used the words that open doors. Supplies to treat minor injuries, disinfectants, bandages, gloves. The nurse asked if we had anything to trade. Mark produced 2 long-life milk cartons he had saved, and the last unopened jar of peanut butter. The nurse's eyes softened at the jar's label. She nodded, and returned with a box of mixed supplies and 2 bottles of saline. No antibiotics. Not for strangers. She said there had been a fight the day before, and that someone fired a gun into the ceiling. She said the state was sending a supply truck soon, and the way she said it meant never. We were leaving when 2 men came around the clinic's corner at a fast walk, with their hands open in a way that says they think they are about to be in charge. I moved Lena and Mark behind me and stepped sideways so the rifle barrel would not be a promise I had to keep. The taller one said they were forming a neighborhood watch and needed to check packs for contraband. I told them our family was leaving and that we would not be a problem for their plan. The shorter one's eyes slid to the rifle and stayed there. He said one cartridge would go a long way. Mark said, "Dad," and the taller one heard the word and measured the situation again. He nodded to the shorter one, who nodded back, and both stepped away like they had only been out for a walk. We did not turn our backs until we were across the lot. We cut a block over and took an alley that paralleled the main street. At the end, near a rusting dumpster, a figure stood with its shoulder pressed to the brick, turning its head slowly as if listening through the wall. We stopped. The figure stepped backward, bumped the dumpster with a hollow thud, then drifted toward us until it reached a puddle and paused, toes just at the edge like a child checking water. I raised a hand for stillness. The figure turned away and followed the faint sound of a flag halyard clinking against a pole by the post office. We waited a count and slid past, hugging the wall, and did not exhale until the trees took us back. In the tree line, Lena exhaled and said nothing else. On the ridge home, we saw 3 figures on the county road, all moving with that steady wrongness, and one man on a porch holding a shotgun in a way that explained why the figures stayed on the road. We made the cabin by afternoon and did the full decontamination ritual before stepping inside. Mark set the clinic box on the table and sorted it by type. He found a single suture kit and held it up like a prize from a fair, then quickly put it into the sealed bin because a prize is only a prize if you can find it later. The second week weighed more than the first. We did not see neighbors. The radio loop from Warren went silent, replaced by bursts of static and a voice occasionally counting numbers that did not resolve into meaning. Deer moved through the trees at odd hours. The bear came back and took a long interest in our barrels. I put up a second fence string of wire at knee height so anything walking wrong would trip before it reached the porch. I also set a bell line inside so the person on watch would hear the fence before they saw it. On day 15, we got rain again, and with it a cold snap. The infected moved slower. We saw 2 in the afternoon at the bend where the logging road meets the old skid trail. They shuffled, then stopped, then continued, like a record with scratches. I took one with the crossbow at close range because there are some jobs that do not deserve the sound of a rifle. The other one turned and tried to find a way through the brush that did not exist. We left it to wander off. Lena made a note in her spiral about temperature and movement. She treats the world like a lab, and the habit saves us more often than it annoys me. Day 16. We dug the second pit on the downhill edge, where water runs after a storm. I set the stakes lower in this one, angled so a leg would wedge and make getting out a slow conversation with gravity. We disguised it with a lattice of small dead branches and a thin layer of needles. Mark marked it with a barely visible stick set at a slant, our code to ourselves that says, "Stop 1 pace short." On day 17, late afternoon, the bell line on the porch gave a short, hard ring. I looked up from the ledger and saw motion at the far edge of the clearing, then a collapse of leaf litter. A human shape dropped and struggled in the second pit. The sound it made was not a shout, not a cry, just breath moving in a broken rhythm against effort. I took the crossbow and moved to the edge with Lena beside me holding a shovel as a lever. Mark stood at the porch post with the rifle on safe, barrel down, face pale. In the pit, the figure worked at the stakes with slow persistence, hands gripping wood, legs pushing, sliding back in. The face turned up and there was nothing there to negotiate with. A row of pine needles stuck to its cheek like stitches. It reached for the edge in a repetitive motion, calm and relentless. I planted a bolt through the orbital bone, then a second to be sure. The body settled, then kept shifting as muscles argued with gravity. We waited until the movement stopped. Then we worked like a road crew. Me on the rope, Lena with the shovel, Mark watching the tree line and describing what he saw in even phrases to keep his mind steady. We dragged the body onto the tarp, severed the head with a careful, efficient cut, and took both pieces to the burn barrel site we dug away from the well. We burned the head first, then the rest, feeding small branches to keep flames even without making a broadcast column of smoke. While we worked, we said the rules out loud again. Tools in the bleach bin, gloves off before you touch your face, boots scrubbed in the tray. No shortcuts because shortcuts are loans with interest due later. Mark didn't speak until the last ember fell to ash. Then he said, "The pit works," in a voice that sounded older. Day 18. Lena woke with a cough from cold, damp air. She is strong, but the cabin air is not kind to lungs when the barometer drops. She took honey and hot water and put a scarf over her mouth when she moved outside. I checked our meds and found we had enough for a small chest issue, but not a major one. We heated the place with a low fire, damped it down for efficiency. She continued to work, just slower. I did the heavy lifting and pretended not to notice, because making a point out of help can turn help into insult. On day 19, Mark's bot rolled for the first time. It was slow and ugly and perfect. He drove it along the inside of the fence and used the camera to check low gaps. He added a horn that chirped twice when it lost signal so we could locate it. He called it Scout, and I did not say the name out loud because naming things makes a person care in a way that hurts later. He set up a charging cradle by the window and taped a checklist above it. Clean lens, charge, test horn, test pan tilt, log any anomalies. By day 20, the cabin smelled like cedar and cooked oats and damp wool. The routine kept us upright. We split wood, hunted small game with the crossbow, set snares along rabbit runs, checked them twice, and logged everything. Lena began small fermentation buckets to stretch calories into better nutrition. Carrots in brine with garlic, cabbage cut fine and salted, jars weighted with clean stones. She also distilled a sanitizer with the small still body from her lab kit, labeling it with a simple black square so even in bad light you couldn't mistake it. Small systems layered into bigger ones. That afternoon, Jer returned, thin man from earlier, but this time he didn't come alone. 2 others walked with him and stopped short of the wire, and all 3 looked to the can line with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Jer raised an empty hand and asked if we had seen a red Honda. I said no. He looked at his companions and then asked to trade. He held a plastic tub with mixed batteries and a handful of candles. He wanted food. We gave 2 packets of oatmeal and a small jar of jerky, and took 4 D cells and 4 double cells, and I counted the trade out loud so there was no misunderstanding. One of his companions stared past me into the cabin, and I took a half step to block the view. Jer saw that and said, "We'll be moving on." They left by the road. That evening we heard voices out in the trees, then the sound of a can line tapping metal, light, like a question. The alarm pinged, then stopped. I put Mark and Lena in the root cellar and sat behind the woodpile with the rifle. Nothing came to the door. Near midnight a drizzle began, and the voices faded the way voices do when people realize the effort isn't worth the risk. In the morning, one of the cans bore a boot print and the loop was loosened, fingers having worked at it a while. We reset the line and added a second at a different height. Day 21. The sky cleared. We used the light to check the traps. Then I took Mark after lunch to the deer trails west of the cabin. We moved slow, feet finding the dry spots automatically, the way practice makes a path in a person's head. The wind was steady from the west. We came to a game trail that skirts a low swale and took a knee. A doe stepped out, then another, then a small buck. I signaled wait. A new shape appeared behind them in the trees. A human figure drifting on the same line, a few yards back, following the herd like a beginner hunter who never learned wind. It moved branch to branch, not fast, just inevitable. The deer lifted their heads, ears turning. The figure kept coming, snagging a sleeve on a branch and not reacting. The deer broke to our left. The figure followed, stumbling over a rotten log, hands out. The buck stopped, trembled in place, then took 2 steps and froze again, caught between instincts. The figure closed the distance 1 patient stride at a time. I eased the crossbow up and took the shot at 15 yards. The bolt drilled through the figure's temple, and it folded into the brush without drama. The deer bolted for real then, tails high, vanishing into leaf light. Mark looked at me, and then at the place where the figure had been. He whispered. It was following like a dog that forgot what a dog is. We waited 2 full minutes, then lifted the brush with the crossbow limb, not hands. The body lay face down, half in a patch of fern, half in leaf mold. Mark kept watch while I retrieved the bolt, wiped it with a rag I'd brought for that purpose, and dipped it in the small tube of sanitizer Lena made. We dragged the body with a loop of rope, keeping distance, and took the longer route home to hit the burn site. On the way, Mark pointed to a second set of prints that weren't ours, nearly filled with the leaf fall, heading the same direction as the deer. I didn't love what that implied. Day 22, we moved early to the river to check fish and fill drums. We stayed off the road, cut through hemlock stands where the ground is soft and forgiving. The river ran low and cold, tea-colored where tannins seeped. We set 2 lines, and I showed Mark how to read current seams like lanes in traffic, how the darker slicks hold depth and the pale riffles tell you what rocks hide below. He already knew more than he admitted. We kept voices low, almost not there. 2 figures appeared on the opposite bank, sliding along the shore at the same wrong pace, clothes dark from old soaks. We eased back into cover. One stepped into the shallows, paused as the water tugged at pants, then kept walking as if the tug were an invitation. Their path bent with the current, then they bumped a snag and leaned into it, pressing with hips and shoulders, trying the world like a lock with an old key. We moved upstream, drew water from a clean seam, cleaned 2 trout we had pulled from below a rock ledge, and left by a different trail. Back at the cabin, Lena recorded the water numbers and marked them in her notebook next to a small sketch of the river bend. She has always mapped the world with pencils when she can, because paper is honest even when batteries lie. She tested a new batch of sanitizer and asked if the deer trail looked busy. I told her about the figure following the herd. She went quiet and made a small note, attracted to movement plus sound equals sign yes. Then she drew an arrow, wind less important than stimulus. Day 23. The temperature climbed. We saw more infected on the county road, never in a sprint, always in that steady walk that eats distance if your attention slips. Lena marked her notebook again. Warmer equals more movement. That evening we heard an engine, then laughter, then a single shout, then silence. There are some sounds a person never forgets. We added a new rule to the table. If you have to shoot, you shoot once, and then move because attention is a magnet. The 4th week started with a break in routine. The roof above the stovepipe developed a slow leak that turned into a drip when rain returned. I climbed up with a roll of flashing and a bucket of roofing tar, while Mark spotted me and Lena held the ladder, scarf over her mouth against the chill. We worked without a word because a wet bed is a problem you can fix, and that makes it a gift. Afterward, we boiled water for tea because hot drinks feel like an argument won. Day 25 brought another pair of visitors in camo, not the ATV crew, these on foot with heavier packs and a more professional walk. They stopped beyond the wire and asked how many of us there were. I told them 3 and gave no names. They said a larger group was trying to organize a safe area down near the Clarion River, and that anyone with skills should report there. I asked who was in charge. They did not say. I asked if they had medicine. They said no. They moved on after a minute like recruiters with the wrong address. I watched them until the trees took them, then marked their direction on our map with a pencil dot I didn't press too hard. Day 26. Lena's cough worsened, low and stubborn, like a nail that refuses to sit flush no matter how carefully you tap it. She tried to pretend it was the smoke from last night's stove, then admitted it had slept with her for 2 days already. I could hear the rasp at the end of each sentence. She drank honey water, put a scarf over her mouth to warm the air before it hit her throat, and wrote her temperature in the notebook twice, once before the fire and once after, drawing a small arrow between the numbers. We stood at the table with a grocery list written like a mission brief: sterile gauze, athletic tape, cough syrup, multivitamins, canning salt, rubber bands, 2 packs of heavy-duty garbage bags, hand soap, a cheap thermometer if we could find one better than the soft-tipped one we had. She added hard candies with a question mark, then underlined it and said the sugar would soothe coughing fits if we rationed it. I ran numbers: distance to Marionville Clinic, risk of running into a checkpoint; distance to Kane Hospital, risk multiplied by the unknowns between. The general store at the edge of Tionesta sat on a back road with a willow tree that had outgrown the ditch and a small loading dock nobody used anymore. I knew a back door there with a bolt that never caught right. We chose the smaller circle on the map because the math liked it. We left at first light with masks, gloves, and a picture in our heads of what we needed and nothing more. Mark wore his thin work gloves under the nitrile so he wouldn't sweat through the only good pair we had left. I checked the SUV twice and then draped the camo tarp back over it so no one walking the tree line would see shine. We moved out on foot. The path to the road carried our footfalls like a whisper through old needles. I set a metronome pace, fast enough to beat the heat and slow enough to hear the woods speak up if something changed. Lena said nothing for the first 10 minutes, then coughed into her scarf and shrugged like an apology no one had asked for. I squeezed her shoulder once, then stepped right to give her the windbreak. Mark ghosted left, eyes on the ground for sign, and his head tilting every time a far sound didn't match the morning. He'd begun to take in the forest the way a mechanic takes in a bay, noticing what's out of place before he has a name for why. The approach to town came through a low swale, where the ditch held old water and cattails leaned like tired spectators. The willow by the dock hung its branches like a curtain. Across the road, a feed store had its lights off, and the open sign turned sideways, hanging on one chain. Someone had painted a message on a sheet of plywood and leaned it against the window. Closed temporarily, God be with you. The words had run where the paint was thin and the weather damp. We took a slow circle around the block first. No fresh footprints on the gravel shoulder, just the spreading V's of deer from before dawn, and a single set of boot prints that stopped at the loading dock and doubled back. No cigarette butts new enough to smell. Someone had tugged at the chain on the dumpster recently. The lid sat crooked. Mark pointed with 2 fingers and mouthed, "Raccoon," then curled his hand to mimic pause. I nodded. The town's sound had a hollow to it, like a church basement when the crowd has gone upstairs. Far off, a flag halyard clinked against a pole. Closer, a loose sign creaked, metal rubbing metal. No engines, no laughter. From behind the small laundromat, the steady whir of a dryer that hadn't been opened since its last load, still running on a timer that kept time for nobody. It was easy to believe the world had stepped out for a minute and left everything humming to itself. I signaled the path to the back. We moved with the patience I used to practice when I was the kid cutting around the side of the school so I could avoid the crowd by the steps. Some habits grow up and pay you back with interest. The back door of the general store wore 2 layers of paint and a dent the size of a fist near the latch. A hand-lettered sign said, "Deliveries use front," an instruction ignored for years, and more useful now as cover than guidance. I worked the bolt with a gloved finger and felt the resistance that had always been more show than security. The door flexed. I eased it in slow, 1 inch, 2, to let the room's smell drift out and tell us its story before we made it tell louder. Dust and old coffee and something sweet gone stale. No sour, no recent bleach. That was good and bad. We went in. Inside, light came in thin from the high windows and made lanes across the floor. A tall clock behind the counter ticked with a confidence it hadn't earned. The aisles were tight, chips and jerky up front, durable goods on the left wall, the back row given over to fishing tackle and oven mitts, and a few things that had never known a category. I listened with my hands, running 2 fingers across the shelving to feel for fresh dust disturbance. A mouse had cut a small track along the baseboard toward the cooler and back. No human scuffs lay over it. That gave us a window. We moved like people who knew what they wanted. Sterile gauze first. The first aid cabinet had been tidied by someone who wasn't the owner. Bandage boxes fronted like soldiers. A couple missing. Others with their flaps tucked properly. I took gauze rolls, tape, alcohol wipes, a second pair of blunt scissors, and 2 finger splints in case one of us forgot where the hammer's head was. I slid a travel pack of tissues into the bag for the cough. Lena had taught me small uses for small comforts. She took cough syrup that didn't make you drowsy and checked the active ingredient twice, then a second brand in case the first had been put back wrong. She grabbed a box of multivitamins and did the math out loud. 30 days times 3, minus the days when we have greens. Better to have and not need, she said, voice thin. Canning salt sat lower, heavy and thick paper. 2 bags went into my pack, flat against the backplate to keep the weight proper. Mark found the rubber band aisle and did what only a person with an engineer's brain would do. He took mixed sizes instead of a single uniform box, because the world never asks for the same fix twice in a row. Then he drifted to the hardware corner like filings to a magnet. He picked up a jar of screws. Wood screws, zinc-plated, a useful spread of lengths, and held it like a glass of water you don't want to spill. The way he slid it into his pack had the hush of an altar. We took a second slow pass for the small things people miss when panic fills the cart. A pack of pencils and a sharpener, 2 bars of unscented soap, a roll of heavy-duty trash bags, thick enough to be useful for everything from rain barriers to makeshift liners, a box of quart freezer bags because neatness keeps a camp from becoming a trap, 1 small tin of hard candies, lemon drops, because a cough is a stubborn animal and sometimes it can be led instead of fought. I set the tin on the counter and forced myself to count 30 seconds, with eyes closed, listening. The building's sounds arranged themselves into a pattern. The clock, the fridge motor that tried to start and failed, the tiny pings of cooling ductwork, no foot scuffs, no breath that didn't belong to us. We left the front alone. The glass faced Main Street and I wanted no silhouette making announcements to strangers. We returned to the back, confirmed the alley held the same quiet as before, and stepped out into a square of pale light. A wind had come up, carrying a paper menu down the lane like a fish swimming upstream. I put 1 foot toward the doorframe to pull it shut, and the sound of small grit under a shoe turned the corner in front of us. A figure walked into the lane with the patience of a man reading every word on a plaque. The shoes whispered on the grit. The head drifted, searching for something a human would name, failing to find it, moving on, searching again. It turned toward us because we were the only new thing that had breathed here in a long time. We backed into the store in the same slow way you back away from a shed wasp. Step, watch, then drew the door in and set the latch. The figure reached the door and pressed. Not a slam, a steady pressure like someone who believes it opens eventually if you wait. The metal flexed against the latch and released a slow, scraping sound, then a pause, then another push. I raised my hand to keep Mark from adding more light with the headlamp. Lena covered her cough in the crook of her arm and held it there, counting silently. The pressing moved along the door like fingers finding the seam. Then the weight shifted, footsteps carried past, and the scrape faded as the figure continued its lane, drawn toward the slow clink of the flag halyard at the post office. We counted higher than we needed to. Then we counted again because caution likes to be indulged. We left by the front, a different path than we came in on, moving along the shadow edge beneath the awnings. The glass of the barber shop held a reflection that let me scan the street without turning my head. The alley figure drifted across the intersection and bumped the post office steps with its shin, then turned to follow the sound of the halyard like a moth follows light. A paper map sat in the rack outside the tourist office. Mark reached with 2 fingers and plucked one out so fast it didn't rustle. He slid it into his jacket without breaking stride. I kept our path 1 storefront off from the corners, never giving the cross street a full view of our pace. The woods accepted us again without a speech. Lena didn't speak until the shade swallowed us. Then she said, "Good call," and the words carried more than they said. Her cough tried to get the last word, but she won the point with a sip from the bottle. Mark tapped the pocket where the map lay and raised his eyebrows. I nodded. We moved back the long way in case anyone had seen the short way. I let the woods choose our speed. A hawk called once and moved on. Somewhere water ticked over stone. It felt like the world had paused its broadcast rather than ended it. Back at the cabin, we did the full decontamination ritual without skipping the boring parts that save lives. Packs down on the tarp by the porch, gloves to the bleach bucket, masks to the line to air in the sun, hands washed with the unkind efficiency Lena insists on, shoes scrubbed in the tray with a brush that has lived there since the first week. I worked the latch on the door with the inside of my wrist, the way a baker noses an oven door when their hands are covered in dough. Small rituals keep a person honest. Inside, we inventoried like quartermasters. The gauze rolls went into the med bin. The cough syrup got a label with dose written in thick pen, so even in the lantern's half-light we wouldn't guess wrong. The multivitamins went into the cupboard behind the beans, out of reach of habit, because vitamins are for mornings, not for when you feel generous at night. The rubber bands went into Mark's salvage drawer. The screws earned a place of honor like fresh nails in an old shop. The lemon drops quietly migrated to Lena's side of the table, and she pretended not to notice when I noticed. By late afternoon, clouds stacked over the ridge, and drew lines of shadow across the clearing. That evening, when we stepped out to draw water, we saw 3 smoke columns instead of 2. One to the northwest, a thin thread that looked like a campfire allowed more air than skill. One due south, steadier and dirty, a structure. One to the east, small and stuttering as if it flared, died, flared again. A line of cars sat empty on the county road like a parade called off at the starting line. Hoods warm to the touch still, leaves collecting in the wipers, driver's doors ajar in 2 of them. We stayed off the road and moved through trees for water, buckets lidded, footsteps chosen so they made no story anyone else could read. Back inside, Mark tuned the radio like a locksmith. After a long sweep of static and squeal, a station out of Ohio came through with a calm voice reading names and intersections. 5th and Adams, barricade down. Willow and State, do not approach. Then nothing. Then a long siren tone that lasted a minute, went flat, and ended without comment. The quiet after the tone felt heavier than the tone itself. Mark listened to the dead air longer than he would have a month ago, as if the silence would tell him what the voice didn't. He clicked the radio off, stood, and went outside with the axe without asking. I watched him line up to the stump. He took 3 measured practice swings with hands low to check the arc, then let the head fall with a controlled snap that put the blade in the same bite each time. 3rd strike stuck. He left it standing, turned, and came inside, with the look people get after they put a problem into something that can take it. "Can we reinforce the cellar door with a 2nd beam?" he asked. I said yes, because no is a word that breaks people in slow motion. We ate early and worked before the light left. The cellar entrance was a simple hinged door at ground level with a single center beam we'd added in week 1. We measured for a 2nd beam on the inside, set in pockets cut into the joists. Mark held the lantern while I marked with a carpenter's pencil. He handed me the bit driver without me asking, like we'd rehearsed it. Lena brought the cough syrup and took a dose, then stood on the steps and called out measurements so we didn't have to climb up and down. The beam, a straight section of oak we'd salvaged from a fallen fence, settled into the pockets with the kind of fit that makes your shoulders drop. We tested it 3 times, then once more after I said we were done, because the last time is the one that finds out if you meant the first 3. Night came on with a slow dimming rather than a switch. We did rounds and found nothing new at the wire. The can lines hung still. The bell on the porch clapper sat quiet. For an hour, our world was the sound of a kettle, the hiss of the damped stove, the tick of the clock that insisted on believing in minutes. Lena coughed twice and stopped both with a sip and a lemon drop. She read the label, frowned, then set the tin down and said she would ration them for mornings when she needed to talk more. That's Lena, saving tools for when they matter instead of when they're in reach. Day 27, we checked the pits after breakfast. Leaves had drifted over the lattice we'd laid. I used a stick to test the edges and reset any sagging branches. A set of small prints, raccoon by the look, had circled and decided we weren't interesting. The bear had not returned. The morning was cold and held itself close. We set snares in the rabbit runs deeper in the trees and took a loop to the creek to read sign. A fresh scrape on bark at knee height told a story of a deer pausing long enough to be nervous. We made note and let the creek talk to itself. We spent midday on repairs and quiet tasks that bring tomorrow closer without inviting attention. Mark adjusted Scout's camera mount and wired in a simple voltage monitor with a 3 LED display so we'd know at a glance whether we had enough juice to run a full perimeter. He invited me to name the colors for the display. I said green meant walk, yellow meant consider, and red meant we are not doing this now. He liked that more than he said. I replaced a cracked hinge on the tool shed, fixed a splinter that had started on the porch rail, and sanded it smooth with a section of fine grit I'd saved from a job in another life. Lena worked at the table with a small beaker, refining her sanitizer run, noting boil times and condensate yield, setting the bottles aside with tidy labels and a piece of tape marked with the date. In the late afternoon, Lena's cough flared once and found purchase like a weed in a gap. She stepped outside to keep it from living in the cabin and leaned against the porch post while it argued with her. When it passed, she raised a hand to say she didn't need help and came back in. We reviewed the clinic plan again, then the hospital plan, then put both on the shelf because making plans can turn into a hobby, and hobbies get people hurt when they replace work. She set a timer for her next dose. Not because she trusts timers more than her head, but because a timer takes the burden and lets the head rest. Day 28, the ATV people returned. The same crew by the stance of them. Driver with the tan ball cap and the habit of smiling when his eyes said something else. Woman with the tattoo on the wrist who notices small things. Third man whose jacket didn't fit last time, and fit worse now. They idled at the bend in the logging road long enough for the engine to broadcast their purpose to the woods, then rolled up to just beyond our wire and stopped. The driver cut the engine, held his hands out from his sides like a preacher about to deliver a comforting thought, and announced they were taking a fuel tithe from remote properties for a community pool. He said the word tithe like he enjoyed the way it made him sound official. I stayed on the porch with the rifle slung muzzle down and the crossbow out of sight behind the wood box. Lena stood in the doorway with her scarf, the crossbow low. Mark watched from the side window, where we had a hole cut to give a clean lane if anyone rushed the stairs. Our tanks are nearly dry, I said, and we'll need what we have to survive. The driver smiled without humor and said survival was a community project now. He tried on the word now, as if he had invented it this morning. I said community starts with consent. The woman's eyes did a quick scan. Barrels, tripwires, the rake lines we'd made in the dirt to record footprints. Then she made a face like she'd stepped in something and told the driver quietly, "Not these folks." The third man looked hungry in a way that food wouldn't fix. The driver changed angles. He asked if we'd seen anyone suspicious, named the ATV break-ins on 2 properties down canyon, like he was building a case against us by association. I repeated the same sentence in the same tone. We are sheltering in place and not interested in joining any collection plan. He tried on a new smile that had more teeth. That's not how this works, he said. My hands stayed where he could see them. It's exactly how it works on this property, I said. We let the quiet grow until it did half the talking. The woman tapped the driver's shoulder with 2 fingers and nodded at the tripwires again, at the bell line, at the hidden wedge for the back door. She could tell from the way the sill sat tight. People who notice traps know 2 things, how to set them and how to avoid dying in other people's. We'll circle back, the driver said, which meant, we'll wait for you to be tired. I said, you do that, which meant, we'll be ready then too. They idled away, slow enough to show they weren't scared, fast enough to get past the bend before a person could memorize their plates. An hour later, from down the road past the bend toward the old camp, we heard a scream. Not the first scream from that direction this month, and not the last, but one that began with an argument and ended with a single hard, wrong note. A second engine started up, then cut out, then started again, as if the driver had decided the show wasn't worth the ticket. We stood in the porch shadow and let the sound be what it was. The ledger kept its own columns. We ran our own numbers. That night I sat the first watch and let the fire go low. The woods breathed a long breath that spread mist at ground level and left the upper air clear enough to see a star punch through the canopy, then another. A barred owl called from the hollow, and something small scolded something a little bigger from the brush pile. The bell line never chimed. Twice, a paper leaf we'd left hanging near the trail fluttered, and twice a breeze accounted for it. When I handed the watch to Lena at midnight, she wrapped the scarf tighter, took her dose, and said she'd wake me if the wind changed. She meant more than weather. I slept because sleeping on your watch is a sin, and sleeping off it is a duty. Day 29 we used for quiet work that looks like rest from a distance, the kind of day that keeps your hands busy and your mind level. The sun edged out from behind morning haze and sat with us like an old friend who doesn't demand conversation. We resealed jars that needed love, wiping lids with vinegar and checking each ring for grit before twisting down. The venison that remained from last week's smoke got moved, rotated, checked for the first hints of trouble. Any piece that even thought about being a problem went into the skillet for lunch and ceased being a question. We built a small smokeless stove from cinder blocks for hot days, the kind you see behind old farmhouses, 4 blocks in a U with the open end toward the wind, a flat stone across the top for a pan. Mark adjusted airflow by sliding a 5th block to make a small chimney. He wrote air in and air out, with a charcoal nub on the blocks like a junior engineer documenting a prototype, which is what it was. We boiled water on it, and Lena said the smell of wood was kinder than the smell of diesel. She set the cough syrup by the cup, took her measured dose, and set a lemon drop afterward with the air of someone closing a file. Lena taught Mark how to read the pH strips and record the well's pattern through the week. She showed him how temperature and rainfall shift numbers, how the stone near the well holds heat and gives it back after dark, how that changes nothing and everything. She handed him the notebook and had him write the values himself instead of dictating, because memory lives differently when the hand does the work. He grinned when the strip color matched the chart exactly, then frowned when it didn't, then learned how to write not just the number, but the context. After rain, before boil, sun direct on stone. He will do that for the rest of his life, because someone took the time to show him why. I cleaned the rifle on the porch with a cloth I've had since college, old shirt cotton that has known more cycles than one man deserves. I cracked the action, checked the chamber, set every piece on a towel in order, and put them back in reverse, oiling as I went, not drenching. Just the kiss of a film where metal meets metal. I replaced a frayed bowstring on the crossbow, saving the old one in case it could be stitched into usefulness for a different job. I oiled axe handles until they took on a low shine that looked like care rather than decoration. Maintenance is the only sermon worth hearing in a month like this, so I preached to the tools, and the tools listened. In the afternoon, Mark made a small sign from scrap plywood and a nail. Silence is security. He didn't hang it where anyone could see from the road. He hung it inside the cellar door where only we would see it as we moved past. A reminder for the days when the kettle wants to whistle and the radio wants to talk and the human voice wants to stretch its legs. He traced the letters a second time, darker, then stepped back and nodded like a carpenter signing his name under a joist. Lena took inventory and found we were down to our last 2 heavy-duty trash bags. She circled trash bags twice on the Ask Me Again list and put the list in my pocket, which is how she says, "This is your job now," without making me feel like a student. She sat at the table with the beaker and wrote a small plan for stretching cough syrup, hot water with lemon drop, steam inhalation with the pot and towel, rest intervals marked with the kitchen timer so she didn't overdo chores that looked small and felt big. She is a chemist. She builds systems to make chaos behave. We ended the day with the kind of tired that feels like completion rather than defeat. The jar lids clicked as they cooled. The stove blocks held warmth and gave it back slow. The radio stayed off by choice, which is different from being broken. When the first star showed, I pointed it out to Mark, then said nothing more because some things don't need narration. Lena coughed once, and this time the sound came and went like a visitor who realized it had the wrong house. She put the syrup away without looking at it like a trophy. We slept with the windows cracked a finger and the bell line quiet. Lena's temperature had stepped down a notch. The note in the book showed the number and a small smile drawn beside it in the margin. We didn't say better out loud. We said continue, which is how people survive. The woods held the same smells they'd held yesterday and the day before. Damp leaves, old pine, the faint iron of soil turning in small lives beneath our feet. Somewhere a distant engine coughed, then caught, then faded, headed away. The ledger kept writing itself, and we kept our own accounts in a hand that didn't shake. On day 30, the sky opened blue, and the forest sounded like it used to, before the words outbreak and checkpoint and quarantine learned to sit side by side. We ate the last of the first sack of oats, and a piece of smoked venison that tasted like a remembered weekend. I wrote in the ledger that the first 30 days had not broken us, and that we had stayed ahead of mistakes by a minute here and a habit there. I also wrote that habits won't save you every time. People will still come. Weather will still turn. Tools will still slip. We took a family photo on the porch because Lena wanted proof we were a unit and not 3 people sharing a roof. After the picture, Mark asked if we were going to stay here forever. I said nothing is forever, and that we would stay until moving became smarter than staying. We set 3 plans on paper: stay and harden, scout and trade, move and relocate. We listed triggers for each and taped it to the inside of the cupboard door. We agreed to conduct one scout to the Clarion River area in the next week to learn what those recruiters wanted. We agreed to reach out on the radio every evening with a brief status and listen for Mr. Doyle's name or Lena's parents' town in Oregon. Before dusk, I walked the perimeter alone and reset the can line one more time. On the road above the bend, a figure stood looking down the hill, the posture wrong, the patience endless. It turned and continued down the road at the same steady pace and never looked back. I let the quiet stretch. Back inside, Lena labeled the new med bin. Mark soldered a better connection on Scout's camera mount, humming a song from a year that feels older than it is. I warmed my hands on the kettle and watched the light move across their faces. I do not tell stories about how I used to measure hallways for exits because of boys who liked to test where I would walk. I tell stories about the way a list on paper can keep a person alive, and the way a steady hand changes a family's fate without a speech. I wrote a note to myself before sleep: grow the garden bed early, build a second smokehouse rack, replace the tarp on the woodpile, count the jars with your eyes and then with your hands. Teach Mark the slow ways and the fast ways, and tell him which is which. Ask Lena again what she needs for chemistry projects and find it. Be the coach I wanted at 12, the one who explains why form matters and how to keep your back straight under a load. The world is heavy now. It will not get lighter if we complain. It will get lighter because we add more hands to the bar and lift in rhythm. That is how our first month ended, with a list, a radio, a cabin that does not leak, a boy who can make a robot from a lawnmower, and a woman who can turn a half-empty shelf into a full day. Outside, the forest kept its own calendar. The infected walked the roads with their quiet wrongness, and the living tested fences for weak spots because shaking a fence is easier than building one. We stayed patient. We kept our boots where they belonged. We measured the distance to the river and the hours of daylight, and the number of times the bell chimed on the porch. When the world asked us to panic, we answered with work. When it asked us to be cruel, we answered with distance. When it tried to make us choose between noise and silence, we answered with a signal made from wire and hand tools, and the kind of hope that does not break when someone rattles the handle. Tomorrow we would plan the next 30. Tonight we stacked the dishes, checked the latches, and wound the clock on the wall that doesn't keep perfect time but keeps enough. The cabin settled on its footings, and the woods took a breath you could hear if you had learned how. Mark switched off the work light. Lena covered the lab kit with a towel. I set the crossbow within reach of the door and the rifle in the rack by the bed. Not because fear runs the schedule here, but because the work is never done and tools deserve to be ready. Outside, somewhere on the road, a single set of shoes moved in a patient line, going nowhere in particular and taking all day to get there.